Yeah, and we don't have anybody in Albany. We're just, that's just.
No,
that's
we
just
have Sarah online for minutes on the conference call right here.
All right. You there, Sarah?
Hi, Sarah.
Aye.
Okay. And we call the governance committee meeting to order here in New York, 5:30. And the first order of business is to review the minutes of the October 4th, 2016 meeting. They were circulated. Does anybody have any comments, questions, corrections? Then hearing none, then are they accepted? Do I have a motion to accept them?
I wasn't there. Can I still make the motion?
Well, I was the only one there, so.
No.
If you read the minutes and you understand them.
Yes. Yes. Gerard, you were there.
I'll move their accepted.
Okay.
If anyone wants to put me out of order, they can.
I was there.
Well, yeah, but I think that's correct. Even though we weren't there, we can still vote.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Then none of us who were there have any questions about the way the minutes are presented, so are you comfortable making a motion to second it?
Second.
All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, good. All right. The next order is do we need Sarah anymore?
We have a number on the agenda. We have a number of governance items and operational policies and procedures to review as part of our annual review responsibilities. And if you want, I'll walk through.
Why don't we start that with the item 2 on the agenda? Because as Michael says, we do have a number of things that we have to do with a matter of routine that have to be done at this time of the year. And we have, the last item is going to take a little conversation.
So with respect to agenda item number 2, which is the annual review of the Corporate Governance Committee Charter, staff has reviewed the charter and recommends no changes or updates at this time. The Governance Committee is free to make any comments or suggestions and provide any direction. Customarily, if there are no comments, we note that the review has taken place and move on to the next item.
So we have no, unless we make a change, we have no action. We have to advance to the board tomorrow.
That's correct.
Any comments on that?
No.
Okay. We have duly reviewed it, and we'll move on to the next item, please.
The next item is the annual review of the mission statement and performance measurements, which also include on a separate sheet the metrics to quantify performance goals and metrics. Given the extent of the revisions that we made last year to this, staff has reviewed these documents and is recommending no further changes at this time. We would, as a governance committee, be recommending this to the board if all is in order.
Any observations on the government, on this the staff's position on this? Performance goals, metrics.
Not on my side.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I don't have a problem with the goals at all, but when do we see the answers to these questions?
When do we see the answer to the metrics?
When we file in June.
What?
When we come back in June with the entire ABO report, so part of the
At a government meeting? I'm just drawing a blank on that happening before.
I can't, I just remember having a conversation. I don't remember.
I believe it's actually part of the it is a part of the ABO reporting that's actually done in the report to the audit committee.
So it just comes as part of that report. It's not something that we discuss.
Well, both the audit committee and the board have discussed it over the years. I believe in their sessions at different times because that report has to be accepted.
I now remember that, and I remember approving the report, but I honestly don't remember ever having a discussion about any of these or paying much.
I think the one thing I recall is I think we made recommendations to change to the board to change some matters of construction metrics based on, and I think that's where we ended up with the actual, may have been where we ended up with the actual cost prepared the authorized budget. I remember we had a discussion of that. Then I'm not sure whether that was a result of the ABO report or result of some other action. I just remember we did something with it.
I can give a recap of what we did. If you'd like.
Please.
Last year in our discussion at the governance committee at this time last year, there was a talk on the mission statement and performance measures of replacing the term highly effective workforce with a professional, highly trained and expert workforce, because the phrase highly effective was not measurable or quantifiable, and that came in as a result of comments both internally and possibly externally. So we started logging more this year, keeping track of more specifically the training regiments, hours, so that we can more specifically log that as part of our report for this year's data. And then with respect to the metrics to quantify performance goals on our March 8, 2016 meeting, there was a discussion of a couple of changes, but under Goal 2, staff recommended changes to correspond to the educational achievements, professional and other licenses, and again, bringing in the hours of training that will be tracked and reported by DASNY on an annual basis. So that wording was reworded fairly decently last year. We also talked about changes to metrics goal number 3, with clarifying language to the governor's 30% MWBE contractual participation goal, to state that goal up front, but also include additional criterion, making it clear that there was a transition date and a cutover from the old goal to the new goal, and also making it clear that the regulations that ESD has in effect for MWBE allow for goals to be properly adjusted under existing procedures. So you can have less, you can legitimately have less than a 30% goal if you follow the procedures. We also made changes to the language dealing with new programs, defined as matters in development and not part of DASNY's core mission, and clarified that tracking of new programs will cease in the fiscal year following the fiscal year during which the programs became part of our core mission. And I think the minutes from last year reflect, Sandra, that you had asked the question on the transition on the 30% goal, and there was a fair amount of discussion on that, and that Dr. Hedges asked questions again on the training aspects. So there's a pretty thorough discussion of those changes, and as a result, the governance committee unanimously recommended to the full board the amendments that were recommended by staff, and that's what we've been tracking to this year. And we're starting to gather that data now, as Mike said, for the end of the fiscal year on March 31st. We'll be gathering that for our ABO report.
That, though, doesn't really answer Sandra's question, which is, does the governance committee get a report with these metrics in it, so we can have a discussion do we get one with the metrics as reported and gathered during the fiscal year?
And the board receives that report. The audit committee is recipient of that report in June when it comes in as part of the ABO report. The governance committee isn't meeting in June typically, so they don't receive it at that time, but the entire board receives that report. And as far as what you were recalling with the construction metric, it did evolve because of the review of the results. When we started this, we had established the on-time date as the contract completion date in the LOI, when the LOI went out on the first contract. So that established our date. It didn't matter whether it was a 3-year construction duration or a 6-month construction duration, and whether it was 1 day late or a year late. So we did, as you can see on the asterisk here, I believe that's actually 2 iterations of changes to the definition of on time and how it would be measured, which was a result of reviewing the results, getting an explanation of, we view delivering a dorm in time to put students in it as on time, and a range of period as on time for a typical construction project. So I believe there has been that discussion about the results. I think it's occurred at the board level and in the audit committee both over time, and then it was discussed obviously with the governance committee to make those changes over the years. And Mike has last year's minutes. I don't remember what year we made those changes to the construction one in particular on.
Yeah, I remember the discussion about construction and a legitimate one.
Right.
Indeed. It's sort of language that says rightly, it's not our fault a lot of times when
Right.
things are later in the construction world. But Mama, which minutes are you referring to? Because you're saying I asked a question. If it was last year's governance committee, I wasn't there.
March 8th, 16.
March. Okay, governance committee meeting minutes. That's the one that right here says I'm absent.
That's the
It's the October
October
meeting.
Usually a
feel better.
October meeting is in
I
front of
really
us,
did
yes.
not remember the discussion.
I brought last year's, in case you wanted to know what we talked about last year. That's what I have
Feel
there.
much better. Thank you.
There you go.
I mean, it's embarrassing that I don't remember it, but at least. it was
Apologies,
there.
yeah. So it was a pretty detailed discussion.
Okay,
We've
thank
been
you.
able
I'll
to
look
track
at
a
this
lot
and get
better
back to you.
This year with
Oh.
those changes.
And I'll do a better job of looking at the ABO report too and linking it back to this, which I obviously haven't always done.
So now, on that, all we have to do is review that, or do we have to?
What the minutes will reflect, if you agree, is that the committee decided to recommend this in its current form to the board for tomorrow.
Okay, so we need tomorrow, if everyone concurs, we're gonna recommend
Yeah,
what we just discussed.
that's
What
correct.
we've done last year, so there's no changes from what we did last year. Are we in concurrence on that?
Yes.
All right. Now we're supposed to review the bylaws, Michael?
That's correct, and with respect to the bylaws, staff has reviewed the DASNY corporate bylaws and recommends no changes or updates at this time. We were through the bylaws fairly recently, so there was nothing new that came up, and if there's no additional comments, we would once again make that recommendation to the board as well.
Okay,
No comment.
questions? All right, let's move on to the Code of Conduct draft.
So the next few items are operational policies and procedures that the committee is required to review on an annual basis. And staff is recommending one amendment to the Code of Ethical Conduct for board members to clarify to whom the chair of the board would report a potential conflict of interest or a potential perception of a conflict of interest. Presently, there is no provision addressing this situation, and we're emphasizing for purposes of this recommendation that the proposed change is not being recommended to deal with the current matter. It is being recommended to eliminate any uncertainty with respect to action required to be taken by the chair of the board in the event the chair decides that he or she has something that needs to be disclosed. The way it's set up right now is the disclosure is made to the chair, and disclosing to himself is the problem that we're trying to address. That's correct.
I think that's a good catch.
Yes, it
That
was.
was omitted.
Yeah.
So this is gonna require action tomorrow.
Will require action tomorrow, and in this case, the recommendation would be to forward the change recommended by staff to the board for consideration tomorrow.
We okay with that?
Yep.
Good. All right. Next.
Next on the list, and I'm happy to go through these individually, but in the interest of time, staff has reviewed the whistleblower protection policy, which is under number 5. Also reviewed the policy regarding payment of compensation and reimbursements to and time and attendance of senior management, and also reviewed the guidelines pertaining to disposition of certain property owned by DASNY, and recommends no revisions to any of these policies, procedures, or guidelines at this time. And if we want to walk through them one at a time, I'm happy to do so. Any questions?
No, any questions? No, nothing's changed. Good. No, we don't need to do that.
So, and the only the clarification that I will make is that the real property guidelines will be presented to the board. It's required that the board also approve these on an annual basis, and that they be filed with a standard report with the Office of State Comptroller.
Okay.
So Mike, item number 4, is that what you're saying? The disposition of covered real property, that portion of this guideline has to be approved by the board anyway.
That's correct.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay, that takes care of the first 5 items. Now the last item is the annual board self-evaluation. I was just supplied the documents this afternoon. I have them here. So if we want to have a preliminary review, which I think we should, I think we should need to go into executive session.
So moved.
All right, we'll vote yes, so we're going to go into executive session.
Go ahead, buddy. You can shut us off.
I don't remember.
Subsidiary meeting? Oh, for the governance?
Oh, let me know how that goes, sir.
You got it. See ya.
I'll be right.
We're going to do what you did in the finance committee.
So
Okay, we've got to go back into executive session.
you did.
Out and did regular session. So are we ready to go out of executive session?
Yeah, it's already
Recording.
All right, we've just come out of an executive session where we took no action, and we now are going to address the subsidiary corporations.
So before we go to the subsidiary corporations, we can move to adjourn the meeting of the
Oh, do they have to be
of
separate?
the DASNY executive.
Okay, then we
of the DASNY government.
Second? There's 2 adjourned? All right, that's right. Now we'll call the subsidiary meetings to order.
So if you could, Bobby, stop this meeting and start us a new one, please. Thank you.